Coming up on the Inside Indiana Business Television podcast, the Infosys Education Center crosses a big milestone. There's a change at the top of one of Indiana's oldest tech companies. A new resource guide will help schools access fresh, local food. Simon Youth Foundation celebrates an anniversary. Butler set to open an esports and gaming lounge. And we take a deep dive on boomers, GenXers, and millennials in the workplace. Welcome to the Inside Indiana Business Television podcast. I'm Andy Ober. A beam signing ceremony last week marked an important milestone in the construction of the Infosys U.S. Education Center in Indianapolis. The training campus and residential center will sit on a more than 55-acre site on the grounds of the old Indianapolis Airport Terminal. Infosys Vice President Rick Cardwell joined Inside Indiana Business host Gary Dick to talk about the $35 million development.
First of all, a milestone this week, the beam signing, kind of a topping out for what is phase one of the project. Talk about the significance of reaching this point and ultimately what this training, this education center is going to be all about.
Sure, absolutely. As you know, about a year ago, even down to today, we broke ground on the U.S. Education Center. And I'm proud to basically report that, construction's moving along fine. We plan to open the U.S. Education Center by October of 2020. Phase one of that will be a 250-seat training facility. It will also house about 650 employees as we march towards our goal of hiring 3,000 locally. It will be a state-of-the-art campus. It will be more collegial in look and feel. And it's part of our commitment not only just to Indianapolis, but also the workforce transformation and pipelining of talent, especially in STEM-related skills.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because essentially folks who go to work for Infosys in the United States are essentially going to come through this training center, right?
That's
so
correct.
It's a positive for Infosys, but for Indianapolis to have exposure to so many people coming through that, it's going to be substantial.
Correct. And so it really becomes a gateway, I think, into the city. So today, as we educate and train our employees, we do that nationally. It's decentralized. Going forward, after the Education Center opens up, everyone that we train will be housed locally in Indianapolis. They'll get exposure to the city. And it's not just an overnight training or a one-week training. We actually train our employees 8 to 12 weeks in a deeply immersive, instructor-led classroom-style training.
You mentioned ultimately 3,000 employees. You are well on the way. So far, you've hired over 500
That's correct.
employees here in Indianapolis.
Right. So what's interesting about this is it's not just about employing Hoosiers, which about 40% of that figure actually comes from native Hoosiers, if you will, born and raised here. We've also recruited the balance of that from over 35 other home states, represent over 100 universities. And the way that we recruit and pipeline talent will be on a national basis and actually try to develop that here locally as well.
Well, you talk about universities. I know partnerships with universities is part of what you have going on too, and a big partnership with Purdue University, and that is well underway in terms of training cybersecurity specialists.
Absolutely. So when you think about the buzzwords in technology of cloud, analytics, mobile, social, and security, we're really doubling down our efforts in terms of education for cyber defense. That becomes an incredibly hot button topic for a lot of our clients, not just here locally, but also globally as well. So our partnership with Purdue is we've trained over 100 of our associates through their cybersecurity program and deployed them nationally to work on our clients' cyber defense.
As you look at the timeline going out, you mentioned phase one. It will open up about a year from now, I guess, in October 2020. But as building out the additional phases, the 3,000 employees, how will that play out?
Sure. So as the business grows and develop, and as we continue to revolutionize our own workforce, we're not a company that churns and burns where we hire, use up the talent, and then we lay off. We actually reskill, new skill, and redeploy our own employees through various technologies. So because of the dynamic nature of technology, it's always changing. The skills needed are always changing. This really becomes the backbone of our ability to be able to reskill and retool. And so as we move forward with the plans, we expect our clients to really want to partner in such a way to be able to use the campus not just for our own training, but for their employees' training as well. And that being said, as the business grows, we'll continue developing the campus.
Very quickly, I have 15 seconds, but I know one of the reasons you're located here is that talent pipeline that exists in Indiana with the state universities, the private schools here. You feel that's a really unique pipeline.
Right, it is. So if you look at our schools around us, IUPUI, Indianapolis University, Butler, Ball State, Valparaiso University, Purdue University, the list goes on. It was very deliberate and intentional, not just because of the business climate here, but also the way that we can actually, pipeline our own talent here and deploy them.
All right, Infosys well underway and establishing its U.S. Education Center in Indianapolis. Rick Cardwell heads up the company's Midwest operations. Rick, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thank
We'll
you.
talk to you soon.
Thank you. Happy.
All right.
Still to come, one of Indiana's oldest and largest tech companies is getting a new leader, and Indiana looks to connect schools with fresh local food. But first, the partnership between Inside Indiana Business and Project Lead the Way has been looking at how to develop Indiana's future-ready workforce. This week, we look at how businesses can get involved to support students and build tomorrow's workforce. Project Lead the Way Senior Vice President Brandy Davis-Handy came in studio with more.
We talk a lot about this, certainly with Project Lead the Way and others, in terms of companies engaging with students. And one of the factors, I know one of the things that you talk about is very important, is engaging at an early age, right?
Definitely. Here in Indiana, we have more than nearly 800 schools that have Project Lead the Way programs. And so for those companies that are looking for students that have really focused on STEM curriculum, but that hands-on learning and can apply what they've learned in the classroom to real-world problems, it's happening here in Indiana. In 800 different schools across our state, starting at pre-K through 12.
Well, and as you look at that, you talk about starting at an early age, but also in meaningful ways. Resources, money, a good way to do it, but there are other ways that you think that companies can really connect with students.
The intention is so important. So there are a number of ways that companies can connect, and there are the financial support to help create programs. There's internship opportunities. There's opportunities for employers to have their employees go into the classroom and talk about what's happening behind their doors. But we've got examples of companies like Toyota, Lockheed, Republic, Ascension that are really creating meaningful experiences starting at a very early age in pre-K through 12th grade. And then those kids are going on to college and graduating and walking through the doors of those organizations, and they're ready to go.
So you're creating, in a sense, a pipeline beginning at an early age, right?
It's a pipeline. What's interesting is, there are so many examples of where students are recruited at a very early age as it relates to athletics. But when it comes to our workforce, in many cases, we're hanging up help signs and really leaving it to chance on those who are applying online or walking through the door are what we need. And we know that right now there's a little girl sitting in a classroom in second grade who is showing interest in engineering. Yeah. And so for those who are looking at a gap in those engineering jobs and want to recruit females, let's connect with that little girl right now.
Yeah, and I know that the athletics analogy, I think, is a good one. You also talk about assessment, an assessment tool that I think Project Lead the Way is really getting some traction on, not only in Indiana, but around the country.
Yeah, I think that this is truly one of the most important things that we're doing right now. Project Lead the Way has developed a first-of-its-kind assessment that measures a balance of both subject matter and transportable skills. And this is so important because in the past and historically, we focus on testing students and making sure that what they've learned in the classroom and what's in that test book, that they can recite that. And what we're focused on, not that you just have that knowledge, but that you have the skills that are relevant for employers. So you're walking out of those doors into the classroom and you understand collaboration, communication, problem solving, critical thinking, and that's what we're hearing is relevant to businesses.
As you look, do you feel this message is getting out in Indiana, that this is really gaining traction? There's so much focus on it in a number of areas, on STEM, on training, technology, getting companies connected with students. Do you think it's resonating?
I think it's slowly resonating. We're hearing it more. I think this conversation is important. I can tell you with Project Lead the Way, the amount of partners that we're having conversations with, and even with the assessment, this is something that we've developed with leading assessment experts across the globe, but we also are working hand in hand with our corporate partners who are saying, this is what we need to know about these students who are coming out of the classroom.
Mm-hmm. And you're getting, some schools are just saying this tool is something that they say is very unique and worthy.
It's exciting. We have major universities, engineering schools that have said, we are using this as part of our admissions process.
All right. Brandy Davis-Handy from Project Lead the Way, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Later in the podcast, an effort to get Hoosier-grown food in schools, and the Simon Youth Foundation turns 20. But now, Ron Farquhar, founder and CEO of Muncie-based Ontario Systems, is retiring from the company he launched nearly 4 decades ago. President Jason Harrington will be taking over. Both joined us to talk about the past and future of one of Indiana's oldest and largest tech companies.
A big transition because Ontario Systems, you told me off camera here, the quiet company, and I think that's true, but has had a very powerful message since being founded in 1980. Talk about, Ron, you and Will Davis started the company. What was that like back in 1980?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Gary, because back in the 1980, there was not very many software companies around. We were one of the earliest here in the state. And at that point in time, pre-IBM PC, pre-Apple computer, computing was pretty much big box computing, large projects, very expensive. And as we started the company as a custom software shop, we did a lot of things for a lot of different people before we honed in on the accounts receivable industry.
Yeah, and in particular, healthcare and government. What has been 500 plus employees now in 28 states? You have a significant company. What's really driven growth in your view?
You know, I think there's a number of things that have driven growth. First of all, just the growth of technology. Yeah. We see that in Indiana here with the growth in the tech sector that just didn't exist in the early 1980s and is now so robust. But also, the growth in the need to recover accounts receivable at a much, much faster pace, which is what we do across a number of industries, but primarily healthcare and government.
Jason Harrington, you're the incoming president and CEO at Ontario Systems. As you take on this role, your vision as you look at where you want to take the company.
Well, the vision really doesn't change a whole lot. I think it accelerates. You know, the recent acquisition by New Mountain Capital really is a confirmation that we're taking this legacy software company and turning it into a recurring revenue, SaaS, very modern software company. And so we've done some of that transformation. We've got a lot more work to do, and we're doing it in really exciting markets. And that's really the vision, is to keep doing what we've been doing, but do it at a bigger scale.
Yeah, as you look at growing the company, talent is always certainly a big issue, and talent's an issue in Indiana. It's an issue everywhere. But as you look at growing and the need and the ability to get talent in Indiana, how do you look at that picture?
Well, it's always something we talk about because it is a real issue in East Central Indiana. We have the luxury of being, for 5 years in a row, best places to work in Indiana. We're one of the few tech organizations that can sort of raise that flag, and we just make our culture front and foremost. And so we just continue to pour into the culture, pour into the people, and make it a great place to be. And talent finds its way there.
Ron, as you compare, and you've mentioned it earlier, but 1980 when the company was founded, 2019 today, the difference in the landscape, if you will, for technology in Indiana.
Well, the difference is across a number of factors. First of all, there's more talent who actually knows how to program computers than was back in 1980. And the talent that is coming out of our wonderful schools here in Indiana are just really top-notch. So that's a big, big difference. But also there are economic development incentives now for software companies that did not exist back in the time. And there's also kind of a group consortium, everything from TechPoint on, that allows a networking to occur among CEOs and among other managers in the state of Indiana. None of that was there 40 years ago.
Well, we really appreciate you coming in on the show. Ron Farquhar, the founder and CEO, co-founder at Ontario Systems, and new CEO Jason Harrington. A lot, I know, ahead at Ontario Systems in Muncie. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks,
Thank you, Gary.
All right.
Remember, you can catch Inside Indiana Business Television on stations throughout the state every weekend. Head to InsideIndianaBusiness.com to check listings. Still to come, the Simon Youth Foundation celebrates 20 years, and Butler puts a focus on esports. But first, Indiana Grown and the Indiana State Department of Health have unveiled a new resource guide to help increase schools' access to fresh local food. The Buyer's Guide will help food service directors find school-ready products grown or raised by local farmers. Indiana Grown Program Director Heather Tallman joined Kylie Valletta in the business of health.
So we had you on a year ago, almost to the exact day. The guide is done, it's up and running, so tell us a little bit about it.
So we're excited because right now, all school corporations in the state of Indiana have this guide, and it's a connector between the producers and the farmers in Indiana who want to sell to schools, and will make it easier for those buyers to find that information all in one booklet.
So we talked about the booklet has been mailed to the farmers, but it's also online.
It is.
And so really cool features. You can search by product. website. You can search by area. Tell us a little bit about the online presence of it.
So what you can expect to find on the website is, a way to share your story. If you are a buyer who has been buying from local farmers, you can share your story, and we will share that out on our website. You also can do a county by county search, maybe seeing who's in your area. I think this is good for food service buyers, but also for consumers who are looking for locally made products in their space.
Yeah, I was searching. You can search by cantaloupe or blueberries.
Yeah,
so,
it's very
and
neat.
if farmers missed the call out a year ago, since it's online, they can still be added online. So it's
They
kind of
can.
a fluid guide. You said you have to admit that buying local food for schools is hard. It can be more expensive. There's some extra work involved. Tell us how this guide helps clear some of those hurdles.
So the people who have expressed an interest in being in this guide already know what food safety preparation they have to go through. And so they're doing that, they're in the process, or they've completed it. So buyers know that when they go through there and find something in their county, that it is someone that they can buy from. It is harder for them to buy locally, but the federal government and USDA have really given tools to these buyers to make it a little bit easier and make the information a little more clear.
And success stories on your website
Yes.
to show that it can be done. You mentioned also you see this as a way as opening some other doors in this whole farm to fork movement in Indiana.
Yes. And so our grant partner is the Indiana State Department of Health. And so we see this as kind of food as medicine. So we see farm to school, farm to institution, farm to hospital, that the ripple effects from just this guide alone will have far reaching.
You said if schools can do it, anybody can do
They
it.
can, yeah.
So you're going to track purchasing at 5 school corporations. Tell us why you're doing that and what you hope to learn from that.
Well, this is an economic development tool, so we do hope that they are in fact buying from local farmers, and the best way to know is to ask them and track that. So we will begin in 2020 tracking at the school level to see if it's changed their purchasing habits.
And tell us also about this whole idea of trying to get, it's more business for farmers, really. So you mentioned economic development and increasing business for them as well.
It is. I think a lot of farmers really want to sell to schools, but they don't really know where to begin. And a lot of these schools, they do want to buy from some of the people in their area. Those students may go to the schools, who live on some of these farms, but they don't have time to track down farmers. So we're hoping to bridge that gap, and by doing that, grow the economic footprint of those farmers.
And the first grant was awarded a year ago.
It
and
was.
Tell us about this possible second grant that you're now working toward.
So we are now in talks of applying for another grant to provide wraparound services, mini grants for tools and knives and cutting boards and training and processing fruits and vegetables for winter use. Strawberries in May, use them in October. We want to give them the tools on how to use this now that they've got it.
And tell us about how you're trying to get farmers on board too. Is there a marketing effort that you have to do to try to kind of get the word out still?
We do. We do a lot of social media. We do a lot of speaking to groups. We go where the farmers are and try to talk to them about what they need. And a lot of them do want to know how to sell to schools. And so we help to kind of navigate that a little bit faster.
All right. Well, it's a very exciting program. I've got multiple children in schools. I would love to have more local food on their plate. So thanks for being here and telling us about it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Later in the podcast, Butler grows in one of the world's hottest industries, and a look at the generation gap in the Hoosier workforce. But now, the Simon Youth Foundation, a national nonprofit dedicated to helping students graduate high school, is celebrating its 20th anniversary. The Indy-based organization says it has helped graduate nearly 20,000 students. President and CEO J. Michael Durnall joined us for our Eye on Education segment.
And I mentioned that number, 20,000. That's a bit of breaking news here because you have just actually crossed that threshold of 20,000 graduates.
Literally yesterday, the 20,000th graduate of Simon Youth Foundation graduated from one of our academies across the country. We're keeping it a little under wraps. We'll announce it at our December graduation ceremonies.
Wow, that's impressive. And the impact of the Simon Youth Foundation, it's hard to overstate it, in my opinion. I just think it's amazing. 20 years. Talk about how this concept, how these schools, how it all came about.
Well, Simon Property Group as an entity probably actually should be credited with creating corporate social responsibility. It has been a family value, it's been a corporate value to give back to the communities where they serve. So one of the ways mall managers are to be very entrepreneurial in their world. They see kids hanging out in the middle of the mall and they say, why are you here? And kids would often say, because we feel like we don't fit anywhere else. So let's turn that on its head and bring schools into the malls. protocols, and that's how we started. Very first academy was in San Antonio, Texas, and the story just goes from there. We're finding, we kind of jokingly say, one size doesn't fit all, and in the mall world, we know that they're specialized, so why does education have to be that way?
Yeah, and truly, you're changing lives, and in many cases, maybe saving lives, too, of high school dropouts, turning them into graduates and going on to careers and fruitful lives.
Right, either through our scholarship program, many of them continue on to 2-year, 4-year, or technical training, or they choose to go on into the world of work, and we just hope that we prepare them for whatever comes next.
Yeah. The success is in some of these numbers. You're in 15 states now, I believe. You have just approved a couple more academies, so you'll have 41 academies next year. 7 will be here in central Indiana, but again, you've got them in states around the country.
Yeah, we're thrilled. We've been able to grow our network through a hub and spoke method, nodes we call them. We have 5 schools in Southern California, 4 in Seattle, 7 here in central Indiana, a couple in the Boston area, 4 in Florida, so we continue to expand through that way.
I know there are probably many, many, many stories, but stories that, as you reflect on some of the graduates and some of the young people who've gone through the program.
They're amazing stories of resilience, of grit. We've had students who've gone on to get Fulbright scholarships. Students, we know of a former alum who is a mayor of a small town in Texas. This year we also celebrated the very second alumni to come back as a teacher in one of our academies in Independent, Missouri. But we often have the opportunity to talk to the students at graduation and try to glean from them their own personal stories. And had a young man just recently tell me, I said, "What's next? Are you excited?" I said, "Are you thrilled?" He said, "Well, I'm just happy to be alive." And I kind of chuckled at that for a minute and thought, well, high school's rough. And then it hit me. He was happy to be alive. And so I think we provide that refuge and a place where a student feels like they belong.
Yeah.
And important for us, too, is that the teachers feel like they belong.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the teachers because there's the teaching component, but there's an added components, I think, that you really focus on in terms of dealing with students and their particular personal lives.
The whole student, so many teachers are content experts, but we work with our teachers, and that's the value add we bring in the foundation to the districts to provide them the opportunity to have teachers understand that student that's standing in front of them. Did they have breakfast today? Did they have trauma in their home? Did they have trauma growing up? How do you help a student in that situation actually get to graduation day? They need something different. They need a different set of competencies in schools, and teachers are the ones who can deliver that.
Yeah, and finally, you talk about the human positive situation out of this, the economic development piece. And getting these high school graduates into the workplace, I think you're pegging the number at about $10 billion.
Right. We know from the U.S. Department and government statistics that every kid who graduates high school is going to earn about $500,000 more in their life over the course of their lifetime. That times 20,000 is $10 billion. Last year we had our largest graduating class of over 2,000, almost 2,100 students nationally, and that was $1 billion alone.
Yeah, wow. J. Michael Durnell is the president and CEO at the Simon Youth Foundation. 20 years of great impact. Here's to another 20 years. Michael, great to see you. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Still to come, a look at the effects different generations are having on Indiana's economy and workforce. But first, Butler University will soon open a new space on campus dedicated to esports and gaming. The Esports and Gaming Lounge will have PCs, consoles, and an area for tabletop gaming, but the ultimate plans are much bigger. Director of Esports and Gaming Technology, Eric Kameyer, spoke with Bill Benner on Inside Indiana Sports.
Again, I'm astounded. I'm an old guy, but I am astounded by the growth that's taking place. Esports, and we talked about gaming, but just everywhere across the nation, around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It continues to pick up on college campuses as well as in the high school space.
So why is Butler now taking the leap into esports?
Absolutely. So we're looking at it very much more of a community engagement position. We're focusing on 3 different pillars, on the competition and providing for what we're already doing in the Big East and also non-conference play, but then also focusing on the curricular side of things. So we have faculty that are involved in everything that has to do with esports, from production and sports media and broadcasting components, as well as gamifying curriculum. And so we want to be able to provide for that. But very much more focused too on the community. So we've strategically located where we're putting the new space to be in a very externally position location between Hinkle Fieldhouse, our health and recreation complex, as well as our performing arts center.
You talk about the competition aspect. Again, you're competing in the Big East with other Big East
That's correct.
Universities, Rocket League, the League of Legends. I don't know what those are, but again, this is something that you want to go out, you want to play, and you want to win, right?
Absolutely. So this is, we've done year to year over the last 2 years, and now the Big East has come in, and the presidents have agreed into more of a collective decision for a 3-year commitment into this space so we can create framework around it. We'll have our first LAN Center tournament actually hosted in New York in early December.
Yeah, and back to community, this again, it's not just something for Butler and students and anybody connected with Butler to use. You want this intentionally to be something that people from around central Indiana can be involved in.
That's correct. Anything from new business startups and whatnot. So we've actually positioned office spaces that are available for other companies to come inside and work right alongside us. So very much like we've reflected with our new Lacey School. And so we're trying to activate that space and allow it to be multifaceted for those community partners in sports and technology.
Universities have begun to offer scholarships. You could go to Butler University potentially at some point, not yet, as you mentioned before we went on the air, but at some point there might be scholarships available.
That's correct. We're working with our admissions team to really define how we want to do that and create that forward pathway.
Again, this is, explain to me what the Rocket League is, for instance. Can you synthesize that for me?
Yeah, so that one's probably the most easiest one to conceptually visualize. Is it's actually just like soccer, but you're driving cars to put the soccer ball into the net.
Okay.
So it's very much in that world.
We said right before we went on, the NCAA at some point, or maybe even the locally based NCAA or the National Federation of High School Associations, might they become involved in esports at some point?
Yeah, NFHS is very involved already, and they're still rolling that out to different states. The NCAA continues to keep abreast of that situation of how to really define it with a governance structure.
If you could, where will this be 5 years from now, Eric?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think time will tell with that, very much so. But as far as the collegiate and the high school, we can really align ourselves with traditional sports in that. So providing next steps for those that are interested in the pipeline of activity and engagement and competition, but then also on the back end for an end-to-end delivery to work then in those tech companies and partners that are right there on our campus with them.
It is just a fascinating concept of where we are going with all this. As we wrap up, if you want to learn more about Butler's offerings, where might they find that?
Yeah, esports.butler.edu.
All right. Eric Kmeyer with Butler University, Director of Esports. It's a whole new world out there, folks.
And finally, are boomers staying too long on the job? And if so, are they blocking growth opportunities for millennials and Gen Xers? And what impact does it have on business? KSM Location Advisor CEO Tim Cook and President Katie Culp took a look in our Eye on Economic Development segment.
When you sent these a couple of these topics, I found this very interesting. So USA Today piece said millennials and Gen Xers are really beginning to complain that baby boomers are staying on the job too long, not leaving, and that's kind of dampening their prospects for advancement. Katie, is this a real thing?
I do think it's a real complaint, and I do think in some instances boomers are retiring longer, but what I think will be really interesting is to see what the calculus is, because with there's all this data out there that millennials are really interested in work-life balance. As a result, maybe are working overall fewer hours than boomers. So how many FTEs does it translate to from millennial to boomer should be interesting.
And the fact, Tim, there are 5 distinct kind of generations that are working in the same workplace. What kind of challenges does that present to companies?
Well, I mean, you have the different personalities, you have different cultural, like how they grew up, I mean, what music they listen to, what they're interested in, but I think if you go more granular than that, it's how do they work? What is their work style? How many hours do they work? Mm-hmm. What are their career plans? If you look at 2 or 3 generations ago, you had people that came to a job out of college and that was their job their whole career. With millennials, average turnover is 1.5 years. So all of those different dynamics play a role in the workforce nowadays.
I'll ask you both this, but where do you see this headed? Having multiple generations in the workplace presents challenges. It's been happening for a while now. Where do you see this all headed?
I think companies have to figure it out. These different generations are still going to be around a while. Boomers are working longer for a variety of reasons, and they're going to have to figure it out, with the guidance and direction of their employers.
Yeah, Katie, where do you see this headed?
I think it's going to result in improved communication and a better understanding of stylistic differences, not just of generations, but personality types. And I think that's a good thing, ultimately. But it sure is different. As a Gen Xer, nobody cared what I thought about my work-life balance when I was a kid.
Good. Tim, I want to ask you, too, one quick question on this same topic, because I think it's interesting, is why baby boomers are working longer. Some of them maybe didn't anticipate it, but with the recession and 401k balances, maybe that's as part of it, as well as the fact that people are living longer and they want to work.
Yeah, I think that is true. If you look at like 2007, I think a lot of them plan to retire a lot sooner. 401k accounts got depleted. They ended up having to work longer. And then I think some of them decided, you know what, I want to continue to work, even if it's not 40 hours a week. And I don't want someone telling me that it's time for me to retire.
Yeah. Another hot topic in the workplace has been for the last 2 years, the Me Too movement really started 2 years ago. It's been 1 year since that highly publicized walkout at Google over companies' gender policies there. Katie, as you look at the Me Too movement 2 years later, is the impact still being felt?
I do think it's still evolving. On the pro side, I think it's good we're talking about it. You can't come up with solutions until you do. On the con side, I run into our clients and colleagues all the time who are legitimately confused about how to approach some of these issues. So men I've worked with for 20 years, and I've always given the camp counselor a hug to. An executive at a publicly traded company said, "Is this okay now?" And he earnestly meant it, because people don't know what to do. And so it's very confusing for all, and it doesn't feel like a good space for me right now.
Yeah. Tim, as you look at it, and Katie kind of framed that, I think, very well in terms of the challenges that companies are facing in personnel, HR departments, and others. How do you see this shaking out?
I think it's a tricky issue. I think people are very cautious. How do we approach it? People that look like me, my gender, my ethnicity, we're the decision makers. We're the ones that can really impact some change here, because we're still the majority of the C-suite, and I think it takes a concerted effort to say we are going to change this, and part of that is who you appoint in positions of power, and part of it is what kind of focus you put on it as a company leader.
And do you think, as Katie pointed out, some of the awareness that was brought about by this maybe is helping to facilitate some of those changes?
I think there's been a lot of good awareness. I think the danger is, let's not pat ourselves on the back too quickly. I think there's not a specific objective or an endpoint in mind. It's something that we've got to be vigilant about, and we've got to continually work on it. Whether it would be this, or if you compare it to where we are in race 40 years ago, we're still talking about a lot of the same issues, and so I think there's a lot of similarities there.
I think it's really important, though, not to overcorrect. Because what I observe a lot is that there's a fear of potential insult, and so maybe women are excluded altogether from certain opportunities. So it's important that we keep talking about it and keep brainstorming about solutions.
There's always got to be balance.
Yep. Final topic we'll talk about, which again is in the forefront these days, is the pressure on companies beyond profits to have some social responsibility, and millennials in particular, and some of the younger generations want to see more of this. How do you see that playing out in the workplace with what companies are really focused on?
If I look at the clients that Katie and I have, it's a common question we get from communities, which is, how involved are you in the community? Do you have specific programs? Most of our clients are already doing these sorts of things anyway, but I think the fact that you have a workforce telling decision makers, CEOs, that this is something that we're engaged in, we want to find purpose in our work, I think it's a good focus to have, and I think it's something that there's going to be a nice evolution as time passes.
Yeah, Katie, how do you see this locally? I know there's that inclusion strategy that City of Indianapolis and Chamber are involved with. There was also an event held where a lot of companies got interns together to go out and do projects in the community. So we're beginning to see it in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, it's meaningful from an employee retention standpoint and attraction, but it's forcing companies to be, I think, as Tim said, they were already doing it, but now they're coordinating and having a greater impact together, and I think that's a good thing. It's more powerful when you kind of join forces like that.
Katie Culp and Tim Cook, KSM Location Advisors. Some interesting topics this week and some great perspective. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Gary.
That wraps up this week's Inside Indiana Business Television podcast. Remember, you can find all of this week's TV segments, as well as the top business news from throughout the state, at InsideIndianaBusiness.com. While you're there, you can also subscribe to our platform of free e-newsletters. This is Andy Ober for Inside Indiana Business.